Libros Schmibros is a podcast exploring the people, books, movies, and ideas that Angelinos care about in a thoughtful way that even New Yorkers can understand. We're coming to you from Libros Schmibros, our nonprofit bilingual lending library in Boyle Heights, on the west coast of the country and the east bank of the mighty Los Angeles River.
Hello, not just to you, John, but to everybody out there in podcast land. I'm David Kipen. I'm here with the Libros Schmibros podcast, and Libros Schmibros being the nonprofit bilingual lending library that we are only too happy to run in Boyle Heights, in which everybody within the sound of my voice is ardently encouraged to come visit. Just as, Wednesday through Sunday from 12 to 6, countywide pandemic numbers permitting, as they do this week, but who can say about next week. We are thrilled today to be visiting with my friend and longtime hero, Jon Wiener, who is a historian and an author and a distinguished figure on the Los Angeles cultural and political scene going back probably longer than he cares to admit. And I just discovered today, consulting his Wikipedia page, the following. Jon Wiener is a political commentator often advocating for left-leaning causes such as workers' rights.
This is the genius of Wikipedia. Who are the Wikipedians?
You could be, if you decided that workers' rights is more than just a left-leaning cause, but that would require...
They don't let you edit your own page, I don't think.
Really? Then get a stooge. I have a stooge who edits mine, and she'll say any damn thing I tell her to. But anyway, we are here on the flimsy pretext. Actually, we have our choice of flimsy pretexts. Jon is very recently the co-author of Set the Night on Fire, his and Mike Davis's history of Los Angeles, and especially political Los Angeles in the 1960s. To
which you devoted Libros Schmibros podcast #1, A Magnificent Hour with Mike Davis.
Of which we are deeply proud, and whose sequel is long overdue, and I'm glad to be hosting it today. We're also talking to Jon because he's one of the leading authorities on the Chicago 7, which Aaron Sorkin has just made a movie out of for Netflix. And I thought we might start by asking Jon just what he thought of this translation, literal or not so literal, of events that he knows as well as anybody.
Well, you know, the most boring thing a historian can say about a historical film is it's not accurate. But then still, everybody wants to know, you know, did Dave Dellinger really punch somebody at the end of the trial? Did Attorney General Ramsey Clark was he really called to testify? Did Tom Hayden really go to his house? So it's kind of a problem to decide, well, you know, the real question is not, is this film accurate? The real problem is it any good? And I think we have to start by acknowledging that it's not a documentary. There are documentaries about the Chicago 7. This is an Aaron Sorkin drama that follows the Aaron Sorkin method, which requires an uplifting, happy ending and characters who, you know, the Aaron Sorkin rules are men. It's all about men. Men debate with each other, big ideas, intense arguments, all very eloquent. And through this process of argument and debate, they come to see that their opponents are not all bad. They come to see that they have limitations and weaknesses that they may not have been aware of beforehand. And then at the end, we can all come together in appreciation of our shared values and live happily ever after until the next week of Aaron Sorkin, whatever it is. And that's what he does in this film. And, you know, if you like Aaron Sorkin, this is a very successful film. In fact, it's one of it's one of the most written about and most liked films on Rotten Tomatoes. And what higher judge is there than Rotten Tomatoes? You know, thumbs up or thumbs down. This is like 91% positive, 260 reviews. So who are we to say there are flaws, weaknesses, and inaccuracies in this film?
Perhaps we're not Aaron Sorkin's mother, who may be responsible for those two. No, I too am a huge fan of Aaron Sorkin when he's on his game. And I actually have a not so private theory, because it was published in my book, The Schreiber Theory, that all of Aaron Sorkin's movies are really about writing. They're about writing legal briefs. They're about writing political speeches. They're about the creative process, and his creative process tends to be writing a whole lot of words to fit into people's mouths. And yes, I enjoyed the show too. What did you think of the performances? I'm curious.
Well, you know, people are saying that Sacha Baron Cohen was born to play Abby Hoffman. In some ways, Abby Hoffman is like a more focused, more engaged version of Borat. So it's kind of an extension of the Sacha Baron Cohen, you know, screen persona into party politics, anti-war action in America. And obviously, Sacha Baron Cohen loves playing this role. He has talked about how much he admires Abby Hoffman, how much he learned from him, how he thinks Abby Hoffman was the smartest person, you know, of the 60s. So there were, and he's sort of the star of the film. He gets the best lines. You know, his arc is a very. Let's talk. Can we talk about arcs here?
Of course. How can we not?
How can we not? The Aaron Sorkin arc for Abby Hoffman is. The clown, the guy who says revolution for the hell of it, learns to take politics seriously. The key scene is when he is confronted at a press conference. He has joked that if the city of Chicago, in preparation for the 1968 demonstrations at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, he has joked that if they gave him $100,000, he would call the whole thing off. And the reporters are pressing him, you know, was this true? Is this a serious offer? Well, what is your price? And suddenly Abby stops joking and he says, my price for the revolution, my life, he says. And we all feel Abby has learned through this confrontation with the media he hasn't lost his delightful, playful persona. But there's a serious core there that we admire. So I thought Sacha Baron Cohen did a wonderful job as Abby. You know, then we have Sir Mark Rylance, one of the great Shakespearean actors of our time. Who could forget him in Wolf Hall playing Thomas Cromwell? Here he returns as another lawyer, making arguments to the powerful. He's got. He's not as tall as William Kunstler, but he's got the hair, he's got the emotions. You know, he's Mark Rylance. How can you know, he wanted to do this role. It's a wonderful thing for us to have Mark Rylance. You know, whatever he does, he's going to be great. You know, there's all these other Englishmen in this movie. I'm not quite sure why. You know, Jeremy Strong, who plays Jerry Rubin, he's an Englishman. I sort of don't get it. Do you have a theory?
Yes, they tend to be better actors, and they tend to be better actors of dialogue. And I think that's what Aaron Sorkin values above all else, as I, you know, when it's clicking, tend to do. Now, you knew some of these historical figures personally, I suppose?
A little bit. I'd met, well, of course, I worked with Tom Hayden. Our book, Conspiracy in the Streets, the Extraordinary Trial of the Chicago Seven, contains introduction by Jon Wiener and then an afterword by Tom Hayden. And Tom and I basically put this together ourselves, 10 years ago. And the New Press reissued it on the occasion of the film coming out. This is what you do in publishing. You know, it's it's hard to get people to buy books, and movies are one thing that inspires people to buy books. So yeah, Tom and I have worked on this and other things. He's been around LA for he was around LA for a long time. He represented us in the state legislature for 8 terms or something like that. So yeah, I knew Tom. The other ones I didn't really ever have much to do with. I just met Rennie Davis like 2 weeks ago at one of these video live events. He's 81 years old. He's in fantastic shape. He seems like a wonderful guy. But mostly, I was a kid. I, followed the news like everybody else in 1969.
Actually, I was hoping we might get into a bit of you as a kid, your own arc. How did you wind up?
My own.
Yes, of course. Real people get arcs. How did you go from being a kid in, where was it, to
St. Paul, Minnesota.
St. Paul, Minnesota, to a distinguished LA political activist with a shelf full of thick books behind him?
These are, you don't think these are really my books. All these books come from Libros Schmibros, and I had to haul them over here to create a appropriate looking professor's set. But thanks to Libros Schmibros for you had a question, I believe. It was about my arc. How did I get out of St. Paul? I went to St. Paul Central High School. And for some reason that I've never really understood, a Princeton recruiter came to our high school and asked the counselor, who the counselor recommended. The counselor recommended 3 of us, and we were all offered scholarships, and we all went to Princeton. It turns out I discovered that Princeton, there had been some change of heart in the Princeton admissions office. And they did this also in St. Louis and in Cleveland and Midwestern big city high schools. Previously, Princeton had turned to Minnesota primarily for hockey players from farm high schools.
Now, point of order here. The St. Paul to Princeton trajectory has more distinguished alumni than just ball players. Is that not true?
Well, perhaps you are referring to F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Yes, but he did not go to Central High School. He was part of the local, but that was, yes, of course. And he loomed large at Princeton when we arrived. What was his book about going to Princeton? Was that Tender as the Night? Was that?
No. Tender as the Night was the last great one. No, I think it might have been This Side of Paradise.
This Side of Paradise. Yeah, it's about arriving at Princeton from St. Paul in 1920 or something. I don't know. Anyway, yes, you of course, David Kipen would know about this. So then at Princeton, it was the 60s. We organized an SDS chapter. Tom Hayden was running the SDS Community Organizing Project in Newark, just up the road from Princeton. He would come down and talk to us. Then I went to grad school in Cambridge, Mass, and worked for an underground newspaper called The Old Mole, which was a wonderful experience and made me want to be a radical journalist. And then my girlfriend got a job teaching at UCLA, and I came out with her, and my goal was to be a radical journalist.
Who were your heroes?
Robert Scheer of Ramparts Magazine was kind of the reigning California radical journalist. Of course, there were noble predecessors in this trajectory. But one of the first things that happened when I arrived was that there was first Angela Davis was fired by the Regents like 1 month after we got to LA. So right away, there was a lot to write about. And then there was a wave of arson attacks on left-wing centers perpetrated by a right-wing Cuban exile group of militant terrorists, is what we call them. They bombed, we write about it there's a chapter about it in Set the Night on Fire. They bombed the Ash Grove Music Club. They bombed the offices of the SWP, the Socialist Workers' Party, and they attacked and firebombed a movement center up by MacArthur Park called the Haymarket. And one of the things I did in my role as boy journalist was I went up to the ashes of the Haymarket and interviewed the guy who'd been running the place, Mike Davis, who was already kind of a legendary LA movement figure. And I was writing at the time there was a syndicate of the underground press called Liberation News Service that mailed a packet twice a week. This was before the internet. It was before faxing. You put things in the mail, and like 200 underground papers around the country subscribed and read my interview with Mike Davis about, he was defiant that they were planning to show a movie about Fidel. And they said, we're still going to show it. We're going to set up a screen in the ashes of the Haymarket, and everyone is invited. And, this will only redouble our efforts to fight, reaction wherever it rears its ugly head. So that was almost exactly 50 years ago.
Now,
and that's where I met Mike Davis. I found him kind of, he was very intense guy, very eloquent guy, and I have to say he was a little intimidating at the time.
Did he appreciate the poetry of a venue called the Haymarket being bombed?
A man who knows his history. I don't think he was in the appreciative mode on that occasion. But that was, then that was our, and then we ended up writing 50 years later a book about that event, that episode, and that era.
How would you compare the LA political scene today to what it was 50 years ago?
Much better. Much better. What Black Lives Matter accomplished in this past summer is just magnificent compared to anything that we attempted. The Black Lives Matter demonstrations were much, much bigger, much more diverse. Black, white, Latino, Asian, much more intergenerational, everywhere, much spread out geographically. There was a Black Lives Matter march in Newport Beach in August. Now, we think of Newport Beach as where Trump held his fundraiser a couple of last month. We think of it as kind of the white hot heart of Republican voting and fundraising in the Western United States is Newport Beach. It's the richest, the most Republican, the most reactionary place. And if there's Black Lives Matter in Newport Beach, something is changing in California. So I just have, we had marches. We had marches of, 10,000 people, but they had dozens, maybe 100 Black Lives Matter marches. And they're just much, much better at it than we were. And I've tried to figure, many people have asked, why do you think that is? And I get a little choked up when I come to this part of one of the things that crippled that crippled or at least damaged the New Left was faction fights, internecine battles. SDS split into two factions at their 1969 convention. Each half expelled the other half, spent a lot of time at this. It was the same among Black radicals. As we document in our book, the Black Panthers were bitter enemies of Ron Karenga's US group. In fact, two US members ended up shooting and killing two Black Panthers at UCLA Campbell Hall in 1968. Nothing like that has happened in Black Lives Matter. They are a unified, coherent, no internal turmoil. And I think there's a simple reason for that. Black Lives Matter was founded and is still led by Black women. And for some reason, women don't have the same, what should we say, macho rivalries with each other that the young men of the 1960s had. So I think we need to celebrate and thank Black Lives Matter for doing so much better. And oh, one more thing about Black Lives Matter. Just in the last week here in Southern California, they had tremendous electoral victories. They elected a new district attorney who is, going to, not going to, who's seeking to abolish the death penalty, abolish cash bail, end prosecution of minor offenses, engage in community, alternatives to incarceration. This was inconceivable. It was inconceivable just a year ago, but it was certainly inconceivable 50 years ago. Prop J, the county of LA, may I continue, is going to divert 10% of its, of its budget to alternatives to incarceration. This is a defund the police initiative, also inconceivable a year ago, much less 50 years ago. So Black Lives Matter, you can see I get excited about this.
Yeah.
It's been able to combine street protest and electoral politics in a way that no other left-wing group that I know of has succeeded to the extent that they have, at least here in Southern California.
Send them to Georgia.
Yeah.
Well, let's see.
I mean, it's almost an Aaron Sorkin story. It's it's got an ending. Where did I hear? I got Aaron Sorkin was on Fresh Air.
Mm-hmm.
He said he likes movies that end by putting a lump in your throat, give you a goosebump experience, and make you feel 2 inches taller when it's over. That's Black Lives Matter after this election.
I wonder if he can buy the rights. Now, I notice Gore Vidal's United States over your shoulder, and you and Gore Vidal were close, weren't you?
Well, yeah, I through the 80s, he was sort of an intermittent guest on my KPFK show. He was an ardent critic of the Bush family, as he called them. They were, of course, going back to the founder of the family, Senator Prescott Bush from Connecticut, was a rival of Gore Vidal's own uncle, who had been a senator as well. So yeah, he loved to go on KPFK and say rude things about George W. Bush. He was part of the Nation magazine. I was part of the Nation magazine. He had this wonderful house on Outpost, which was kind of a legendary place. And so then eventually I did a book of, and I interviewed him various places. The book festival had me interview him. And we had him in different venues where I fed him straight lines and did his thing. And he was great at this. This is he would go on. Some of our listeners may remember Johnny Carson. He was like those were the days when famous authors were celebrities enough to go on late night TV. So you would see Norman Mailer, you'd see Gore Vidal, you would,
They still have a home on the Libros Schmibros podcast.
Well, thank God for that. Thank God.
Tell me, what do you think Gore would make of the state of American politics in 2020?
Oh, he was very big on the decline of America, the end of America, the United States of amnesia. So he would have been right at home, commenting sardonically on America, being flushed down the toilet, and from his Olympian perspective, what would you expect is a bunch of yahoos like the citizens of mid-America.
I should mention that we're speaking the week after President Biden, perhaps, not too long.
President-elect. We call him President-elect Biden.
Yes, I know, but I'm trying not to date the broadcast, and many more people will view this broadcast when he is already President Biden. We're speaking about a week after his election. How sanguine are you for the prospects of all right-thinking Americans in the near and not so near future?
Well, I'm not sure about all Americans, but the worst that we were told to fear by my many friends and your many friends has not come to pass. There was no armed militias in the streets on election day. There was no violence at the polling places. Of course, the Republicans have had a decades-long effort at vote suppression, but nevertheless, 76 million people voted for Joe Biden, the most have ever voted for any presidential candidate in the history of the United States. I have to say 71 million people voted for the other guy, and which is more votes than any other candidate has gotten in the history of the United States, with the exception of Joe Biden. But right now, Trump has refused to concede. I don't think it actually matters if he concedes. What matters is that Chief Justice John Roberts administers the oath of office to Joe Biden on January 20th, and I'm pretty confident that that is going to happen. All signs are that is what's going to happen. I mean, there are some lawsuits in the works. They're all ridiculous.
And then after he administers the oath of office, then what?
Well, people are afraid, well, what if Trump doesn't leave? What if he refuses to leave?
Forget Trump. What are your hopes and dreams and fears for, the next several years after that?
Well, of course, our greatest fear is that Biden will be a failure as president because the Republican Senate will obstruct all the things we need him to do. And in 4 years, somebody other than Donald Trump, somebody more effective than Donald Trump, maybe one of these Fox News people, will run as a Republican and will win. That would be the nightmare scenario of mine. But there are so many things that you can do with executive orders. There's 100 things Biden could do on day one, including canceling student debt, ending fracking, shutting down the pipelines the gas pipelines under construction, all kinds of environmental stuff. So there's a lot that Biden could do. And, it isn't yet decided that Republicans will win at least one seat in Georgia. This is going to be a tight one. And I think, they're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on both sides. If you live in Georgia, you are going to be so sick of seeing TV commercials in about a month. But it all depends on Georgia. It all depends on Georgia, and God bless Stacey Abrams, our hero, who has led the transformation of the Georgia electorate, and more power to her. Let's give her money. And, the history of Georgia, Georgia could save us. Who would have thought?
Perhaps a tax on broadcast advertising over the next couple of months could create a source of a revenue stream for I don't know, any number of deserving causes. I can't resist confiding my own hopes, just because I've been beating my brains in to make them reality for about 6 months now. This may be, well, it's not the first public announcement, but Representative Ted Lieu of the South Bay has forwarded language to the Legislative Council to draft a bill for, cross your fingers and no guarantees, but the reinvention of the Federal Writers Project.
Wow.
This is something that, a dream I've cherished since I worked at the NEA. And
you have written about this. I have read your wonderful essays about how we need this and how great it could be and how to run it. And I have an idea of who should be the director.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes.
And give up.
I know Libros Schmibros needs you, but I think the new Federal Writers Project would need you more.
Well, it's just possible that the new Federal Writers Project might even need Libros Schmibros, but this is all in the talking and bloviation stages, and I don't want to jinx anything. But let's talk a bit more about, well, for one thing, since broadcasting came up, let's talk about your show. You've been broadcasting for the nation for how long now on KPFK, and I assume coast to coast?
Well, there's two separate shows. The KPFK show started around 2000.
Mm-hmm.
The Nation podcast has been going, I think, for maybe 5 years or something like that. So, I ask people questions and they tell me what they think, and we do it every week, and some people listen, and it keeps me on my game, as they say. I retired from teaching at UC Irvine 4 years ago, mostly because I had a 1 hour commute. And
if only you'd stuck around this quarter, and who knows how many quarters to come, that evaporates. How do you think
that's right?
Getting work done?
Why didn't I anticipate this? Anyway, I'd already spent like 30 years of my life on the 405 freeway in rush hour, and enough already. So it's been I can devote more time to asking people questions on the podcast than on the KPFK show now that I'm a retired historian.
Don't we say emeritus?
Pardon me?
Don't we say emeritus?
We say emeritus. Yes, we say emeritus. Of course, during the period since I retired, Mike and I wrote this 800-page book. So, I've managed to find other projects. But yeah, I really enjoyed. Here's the thing about writing in America. You know this well, but I'm not sure all our readers know this. It's hard to be a writer in America. It's the number of publishers is shrinking. The number of bookstores is shrinking, and the number of outlets, media outlets for book talk is shrinking. We mentioned it used to be you could see Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal and their ilk on late night TV. Now, some of the most famous authors are willing to appear on little podcasts like Libros Schmibros or Start Making Sense. Hey. They're willing to go on community radio stations like KPFK, so you can get really talented, important, big people on these little shows because there's hardly any place else left for them. So I've had Richard Ford on. I've had, who's on my bookshelf up here, Jane Mayer from the New Yorker, Naomi Klein, Chris Hayes. All of these people are willing to come on, these little podcasts when they have books out. So the collapse of the publishing industry has been a great boon to little podcasts and community radio stations.
I should mention that on this very telephone, I have an alarm that comes up weekly and reminds me when it's time to tune in to Stop Making Sense, your information show. It reminds us of the time slot just because I have a phone that absolves me of having to go.
Since January of 2017, the KPFK show was renamed at that point Trump Watch. And it's also the Trump Watch podcast. If you missed the live broadcast, you can get, but starting on January 20th, it's got to have a different name. And David, I'm hoping that you will help us come up with something else to call this thing. I mean, Biden Watch, that doesn't really have the same je ne sais quoi. So that's on KPFK live Thursday at 3, and then starting at 4 o'clock is the Trump Watch podcast, which you can get at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. The Nation podcast is called Start Making Sense. That is available to podcast subscribers starting Wednesday afternoon, and then starting Thursday at thenation.com and wherever you get your podcast. So by January 20th, we need a new name for the Trump Watch podcast, and please help.
Well, as the christener of Libros Schmibros, years ago, I hung out a shingle as what I flattered myself to call a nomenclaturist. And you're the first person to actually knock on the door. So what are you hoping for this name to connote?
Well, most shows on KPFK, perhaps the Libros Schmibros audience is not as aware of this as they might be, have names like "The People United Will Never Be Defeated," or "Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win." So my goal is to have something a little less intense than that. And Trump Watch, everybody had a Trump Watch for the last 4 years. CNN had Trump Watch, and the Republic had a Trump Watch. So it's okay if somebody else has the same idea, but it should. This is talking about politics in America. Seen from what was it that Wikipedia said? A left-wing perspective or something
Left-leaning
like that?
causes, yes.
Left-leaning, yes. Support for left-leaning causes might be implied by this or not. So yes, you're our reigning nomenclaturist, and we need help badly.
All this. My first thought, which regardless of what the surrealists say is rarely my best thought, would be the people united will never shut up. But I'm going to keep working on that.
I don't think that will cut it.
I have another self-aggrandizing question / remark, which is that I'm the author of this book, Dear Los Angeles, the City in Diaries and Letters.
Amazing book.
Thank you. And I'm now working on Dear California, the state in Diaries and Letters. So I wonder if you would care to, well, certainly your own will be welcome. I don't know if you've made any premature decisions about where the Jon Wiener archive will repose, but are there other diaries and/or letters within California, not just Los Angeles? And maybe I'd even broaden the collection to the question to include unwritten memoirs or biographies that you think would be a welcome addition to the written record of California lore.
Oh my goodness. Could I want to go back just for a minute to Dear Los Angeles.
Sure.
When I started reading Dear Los Angeles, I was annoyed as hell that you didn't put this in chronological order. I'm a historian. Everything, 1920 came before 1921, and you did it by day. And it was, this really annoyed the hell out of me. So like, if you want to know, well, what were people thinking, on the day after Pearl Harbor, it took hours. It took hours to do this. So I spent about a week just gnashing my teeth, mad as hell. And then I just started reading the book, and suddenly dawned on me, this was a brilliant idea. This brings together things that, of course, never were together before and never will be together again. But it really is incredibly stimulating, provocative, and totally fascinating. So I ended up being just filled with admiration and appreciation for the nutty way that you organized this.
Well, at the risk of demythologizing my genius, it wasn't my idea. 7 years ago, a book came out called New York Diaries that I don't think even pioneered the arrangement in its own right. I think there may have even been one about London years ago. And if you think you fought against that organizational schema, where January 1st has New Year's diaries and letters from an early California jurist in 1850 on up through Christopher Isherwood ringing in the new year in Santa Monica. I fought this for months and months, and then finally, whether it was my publisher or good sense, I gave in. And yeah, I certainly reconciled myself to it, but no one has yet told me about their own struggle and eventual capitulation to the organizing principle. So that's lovely to hear. And for anybody who is still holding out for a chronological Dear Los Angeles, or at least a way to look up Pearl Harbor, you can go to the index. And I gather the ebook of it may just allow sorting in whatever order you possibly want. So you can look at it chronologically, you can look at it by author, you can look at it by subject. If not, I will certainly insist on that for Dear California. But I think it may even be possible if you know how to hotwire Dear Los Angeles. So thank you for stalling and allowing us to discuss my book. But whose unwritten story in California, past or present, seems to you a missing book on even the voluminous shelf behind you?
Unwritten.
Yeah.
Unwritten.
Whose biography would you write if given world enough and time?
I'm gonna have to take a pass on this one, and I'll get back to you on this.
Fair enough.
Some of the most fascinating people in our book actually did. Dorothy Healy, for example, the head of the Southern California Communist Party, very inspiring figure to especially to Mike and also to me and a whole generation of radicals in Los Angeles, black and white. She did a memoir with Maurice Isserman called, what's it called? It's called Dorothy Healy Remembers. I'm sure there's a Dorothy Healy collection of interviews at UCLA, which has a lot more that Mike used for our book on LA in the 60s. But she's a memorable and quotable and not fully appreciated person.
I have to say, I'm a little ashamed of you. I gather the journals of Richard Neutra are in print, are they not? And I believe edited by someone of your acquaintance?
My wife, artist and video maker Judy Fiskin, had a job when she was young. How did you know this? Working at the Neutra house with a very elderly Richard Neutra on editing his diaries into readable English. Yes. How did you know this?
Well, Wikipedia is good for certain things. And lo and behold, I discovered that. I was ashamed not to have located it while I was working on Dear Los Angeles, but I do intend to include Los Angeles, yes, even in Dear California. And you better believe I'll probably be on the phone to you and Judy begging for some sort of copyright-related mercy. I see we've been talking for quite a while, and it's flown by. I'm quite enjoying it. I could probably scare up maybe 2 other questions, barring anything.
I still love to talk about what's wrong with the Aaron Sorkin movie,
And yeah, I would love to return to that. Now, where were you in '68 in Chicago during the summer?
I did not go. When they first announced there were going to be protest marches on the Democratic National Convention, this was like, for people who might have been too young to know this history, the war in Vietnam was a Democratic war at that point. It was President LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who had escalated it from like 10 or 40,000 up to 500,000 American troops there. So if you're going to protest the war, you had to protest the Democrats. But then Rennie Davis, who was organizing this along with Dave Dellinger and Tom Hayden, expected hundreds of thousands of people to come. But then the city of Chicago denied permits to the march, and Mayor Richard J. Daley of Chicago announced a few months earlier that he was ordering the police to shoot to maim rioters and shoot to kill arsonists. So it was clear that this was going to be a brutal battle between Chicago police and whoever showed up to march. The Black Panthers, recommended not going. They called it Custeristic. Phrase makers of a kind we don't really have anymore in America. And I did not know that term at the time, but that was sort of my view. Like you would go, if you went to Chicago, it would be to fight the police. And so instead of hundreds of thousands going, really only about 10,000 people went to Chicago. It was, in fact, it was as I explained in Conspiracy in the Streets, the extraordinary trial of the Chicago Seven. It was one of the smallest anti-war demonstrations of the era. I mean, 3 years before, SDS organized the first big anti-war protest, the March on Washington in April 1965. 25,000 people came to that. The protests in 1969 involved hundreds of thousands, eventually 250,000 people. So for 10,000 people to show up in Chicago and joined by maybe another 5,000 locals was a huge disappointment. And I was one of the people who did not go.
I just thought of another name for Trump Watch when you change it. The whole world is listening.
Do you think that's a little grandiose?
Well, let's not say grandiose. Let's say aspirational.
It's a very nice way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
It could be that they're all listening for, what the people united are going to, call for.
I will continue to think. Give me a deadline. Deadlines focus the mind.
January 19th. January 19th is
January. Oh, okay. Well, yet another reason for me to look forward to it. January the 20th. What did you think of the ending of Sorkin's version?
Well, I'm glad you asked about that because I've thought about the ending a lot. I read that quote from Sorkin on Fresh Air saying he wanted something that left a lump in your throat and made you feel 2 inches taller. And he achieves that in this ending. The end of this movie, the movie has seen, the big debate of this movie. Well, there's the debate between the defendants and the judge and the prosecution, but there's also debate within the left between Abby Hoffman, revolution for the hell of it, cultural radicalism, have fun, and especially Tom Hayden, who's a spokesman for a much more kind of familiar kind of actually electoral politics. He wants to win elections. He says, if you can't win elections, you're nowhere. And this just seems pathetic to Abby Hoffman, who wants to confront, to desanctify, to delegitimize the courtroom and American power. And the finale is when they come to the sentencing, and the judge asks Tom Hayden to make a closing statement on behalf of all the defendants. And he says, Mr. Hayden, you could go far in the system if you just, shaped up a little bit. And if you make a closing statement that is respectful and that is not political, I will look favorably upon you in sentencing, inviting him to join the system. Do you understand, Mr. Hayden? And, we're all just hoping, Tom, do the right thing here. And Tom then defies the judge, stands up and instead of being respectful and not political, reads a list that we've been hearing about all through the film of Americans killed in Vietnam, defying the judge, speaking truth to power. The courtroom erupts in cheering. The defendants are on their feet. We, in our living rooms, leap to our feet cheering, yes, go Tom.
Guilty.
Tom Hayden. The happy ending is that Tom Hayden has learned to speak truth to power. Tom Hayden has learned to not go along and to he's learned the lesson from the judge, who's been so unjust. He's learned the lesson from Abby Hoffman to speak the truth. And that's our happy ending. Now, that is a ridiculous thing to say about Tom Hayden. Tom Hayden was on trial, charged with felonies because he had spoken truth to power, defied the rules, challenged the status quo. But in the context of the movie, and everybody, all of our friends are mad as hell about this. How could you do this to Tom Hayden? This is ludicrous. This is pathetic. This is Sorkinization of our history. But what Sorkin is saying here is Tom Hayden
Damn it.
He has learned to stand up for what is right, even though it is a risky, even though it is a risky and dangerous thing. And the message that ordinary people can stand up and challenge injustice and speak truth to power, this is actually a very good message for a political movie in America today. And so I appreciate what Aaron Sorkin is trying to do here. I encourage people to see the movie. And yeah, it's not a documentary, but you know, as a message film, I think that's a very good message.
Would you think Tom, as a friend of his and someone who married into Hollywood royalty in the person of Jane Fonda, and someone who had, I think, very successfully, undertook the rather complicated task of shaping his own life into what I still think is one of the great American political memoirs, Reunion. Do you think he would have seen it that way?
You know, Sorkin is very proud that Tom Hayden was the one defendant that he consulted on this, even though others were around. Bobby Seale is still around, Rennie Davis is still around, Lee Weiner and John Freunds are still around. And there was one of these online video events where Tom Hayden's son, Troy, read from some notes of Tom's to Aaron Sorkin about the changes that he recommended in the script. And, you know, if this is gold for people like you and me, he didn't complain about the ending. The thing that he complained about the most was a line where Tom says to Abby, you don't really want the war in Vietnam to end, because if the war in Vietnam ends, you have no more place on TV. And Tom says, I never would have said that. This is completely unfair to Abby. Of course, Abby wanted the war to end. We all wanted the war to end. You got to take that sentence out. So that's the sort of thing Tom was concerned about.
It stayed in, didn't it?
It stayed in. It is in there. It is in there. And, you know, it's part of, each of them has an arc where each accuses the other of manipulating the situation to advance themselves. And they each learn to appreciate each other in the Sorkinization, but through Sorkinization. But it's interesting that Tom did not, at least in the part that his son read at one of these events, he didn't complain about the ending being wrong or unrealistic or inaccurate.
Selfishly, I should ask you, did Tom ever write you a letter or even an email that might lend itself to inclusion in Dear California? Start digging.
You know, we worked on this book together, but it was all about, you know, what should go in and what could be left out of when you're cutting a 21,000 page transcript down to 200 pages, you make some editorial decisions. And, you know, he had opinions about that, but they're not the most important thing. But by the way, I agree about Reunion. I reread the chapters in Reunion about the Chicago demonstrations and the trial when the movie came out and our book came out. And yeah, it's a terrific book. It's a terrific book. And of course, Tom Hayden did join the system in the 70s. He ran for office. He got elected many times. He achieved wonderful things as a state legislator. I agree completely with you. It's an American story.
No sooner does he end it with his happy marriage than I think the marriage ended shortly after publication. We've seen that before in some cases. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but people who reach a sense of closure upon finishing a memoir and then their lives change completely. Since you, and come to think of it, the final crawl after the scene of reciting his beginning to recite all the names of all the Americans killed in Vietnam, I believe the final crawl stresses the fact that he went on to serve umpteen terms in the California state legislature.
Yes. Yes.
By the way, that closing scene reminds me of my new idea for a public land art installation, which I don't know how to find a collaborator for, but I think is woefully overdue and appropriate, which would be to take I think it's a dozen miles of wall that Trump actually did succeed in building, in addition to, all the miles that just, replaced old fencing with new fencing. I think all the Americans who've died from COVID, their names should be inscribed on that wall, like the
Wow.
Vietnam Wall.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome.
Let's see. I have another question, which is, I suppose with respect to your other books, you're a scholar of the Cold War as much as anything. Do you think we are at risk of entering another Cold War, either internationally or internally?
Man, you closing with some big ones here. The Nation magazine is always worried about provocative moves towards Russia. And, it was one of the great ironies that conflict with Russia, the other great nuclear power is the issue here, of course, was always a Republican thing. The Republicans were always banging the drums, but then we got Trump, who we do wonder what exactly, have they got on him, or is it just that he still wants that his next project will be the, Trump, the Trump hotel in Moscow? Is that the only reason he has had such détente with Putin?
No, he has. I think Putin has a remote control arsenic pill in Trump's bloodstream that he can activate at any moment.
China is a big worry, and Trump has done a lot to provoke conflict and disruption with China. And China, it's a horribly repressive, anti-democratic country, which does a lot of terrible things. On the other hand, they're, probably the most powerful country in the world right now economically. So that's where the new locus of conflict is shifting to the Pacific. That's been going on for a decade or two. It doesn't take me to tell you about this. I mean, the battle within the United States between the right and left has never been so intense, and everybody knows that, it's not going to go away with Trump. There's these 71 million people who, what we thought 4 years ago was, okay, some of these people are just Republicans who want their tax cut, and they'll vote for any Republicans. Well, what about these new Republicans, the people who went from Obama to Trump? There's not a lot of them, but they were enough to give him the election in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania 4 years ago. This year, they were just enough on the other side in those same three states. But, 4 years ago, their view was, well, the Democrats haven't done much for us, really. Our lives haven't changed. Let's give the other guy a chance. He says he cares about us. Let's see what he does. Well, they had 4 years. We thought it was a horrifying 4 years. And 5 million people more than voted for him last time, voted for him this time. They liked what they saw. And this is still, perhaps you can tell by my tone of voice, immensely dismaying, upsetting, worrisome. What do they want America to be? Where will they turn next? Now what? That, I think, is the big worry. Trump will go. Of course, his main goal is to get them to send him $5, $10, $25 first for his legal defense. Then he'll be raising money for his 2024 campaign. Then he'll be raising money for his library. So the Trump grift, you forgot about the library.
Of all people.
That was Rick Perlstein this morning tweeted that this is going to be the next big thing. Of course, the concept of the Trump library, has there ever been anything so laughable? What's going to be in there? Some Big Mac wrappers, and some.
Well, as the son of a Wisconsin-born father or a Wisconsin-raised father and a Pennsylvania-born mother, I feel entitled to at least a little optimism, and who knows, maybe a new federal writers project can reintroduce America to itself. Penultimate question. You're also the author of a book about John Lennon's FBI file.
Yes.
Maybe this is the last question. Have you seen your own FBI file?
You know, I got it in the 70s, and I mean, what happened was the origins of this were that as I said, I helped organize an SDS chapter at Princeton in the 1965 or something like that. And J. Edgar Hoover thought that SDS was, controlled by Moscow. And so every person who was an activist or any kind of leader of SDS got investigated by the FBI. So that's where all this started. They went back to my high school, St. Paul Central, and asked my teachers about me. And my teachers, you can't tell who they are, their names, have been removed, but my teachers assured them that I was, a good American and that I was not under the control of Moscow. So I found that very gratifying. And the other thing you find in FBI files is they were maniacal newspaper clippers. In those days, everything was in print, and they had, hundreds, maybe thousands of clerks. And if your name ever appeared in the paper, somebody would clip it out and Xerox it and stick it in your file. So here's, the student newspaper, letters to the editor, talk about ephemera. They collected ephemera like you can't believe. So, and then everything else is blacked out. It's hard to tell what the hell. The most interesting, I can tell you one little anecdote about this. In 1967, I had moved to Cambridge. I was in graduate school, and I was in Harvard SDS and writing for the SDS newspaper about what was going on at Harvard. And there was a knock on the door of my apartment, and there were two FBI guys there. And they said, we're doing a routine background check on one of your Princeton classmates, Joel Premack, and we'd like to ask you some questions about Joel Premack. And Joel Premack was the valedictorian of my class. He was a brilliant a physicist and mathematician, and he was anti-war. I knew a little bit about him, but we weren't close friends. So I was very puzzled by this. Like, why? There's 800 people in this class. Why are they asking me about Joel Premack? So I said, I didn't know this guy very well.
Talk to them? You collaborate. You talk to them?
I told them one sentence at the front door. I said, I didn't know this guy very well. I don't really have anything to say about him. As far as I know, he's a perfectly okay guy. And I'm really not going to talk to you today. Last month, I was on another one of these video type events with Joel Premack, who is a distinguished professor at UC Santa Cruz. And I told him this story, and I said, Joel, did you ever get that security clearance? And he said, I never applied for a security clearance in 1967. I was a leftist. I was a radical. They were never going to give me a security clearance. So that's my last story for today.
Well, I hope your file is still open, if only because somebody has to subscribe to every newspaper in the country. Let me think.
I just want to thank you as the nomenclaturist for your efforts, which I hope will continue. And I'm looking forward to this California book.
As am I, though I'm getting a little sidetracked by a novel, but luckily the one at least has a deadline. And I encourage you to bring a shelf load, at least of your own books, the Libros Schmibros, at your earliest opportunity, so that everybody out there can come and marvel at them and see how warmly inscribed they are. And I hope borrow them and learn from them as much as I have.
That's a great invitation. We will do it.
Thank you, Jon Wiener, on behalf of Libros Schmibros and all of our podcast listeners and viewers. And what's your next book?
Yeah. Right now, I don't have a next book. Right now, I am happy to be doing these podcasts and waiting to see what will happen. I just wrote an 800-page book. Give me a break.
Thank you, Jon.
Thank you, David. This was terrific.
Oh, I enjoyed it so much.
So ends another episode of Libros Schmibros, recorded at the bilingual nonprofit Libros Schmibros Lending Library in Boyle Heights. By all means, follow us online in all the old familiar places, or email us via info@libroschmibros.org. By the way, we couldn't do this podcast without the whole Libros team, Cuauhtemoc, Colleen, Diana, and Alberto. And all of them would kill me if I didn't add this. Please consider visiting libroschmibros.org, hitting the donut button, the donate button, and giving us a gift. We put good free books into people's hands 5 days a week here at Libros, right across from Mariachi Plaza, up in the old Boyle Hotel. I'm David Kipen, and there'll always be a free book for you, and thousands more to borrow here at Libros Schmibros.